It was just past midnight when Detective Alice Morgan arrived at the scene. The house stood dark and quiet against the flashing red and blue lights, an ominous silence filling the air. The victim, a reclusive writer named Julian Hayes, had been found sprawled over his desk, his fingers still resting on his typewriter as if his last moments had been spent trying to communicate something crucial. But as far as Alice could tell, whatever message he might have left had been buried in the ink-stained chaos of a half-written page. Julian's lifeless body bore no visible wounds, no sign of a struggle. He looked almost peaceful, as though sleep had simply crept up on him. But Alice's instincts told her that this was no natural death. Cause of death? She asked the medical examiner, a stoic woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit. Poison, we suspect, the examiner replied. No obvious injuries or trauma. We'll confirm it after the autopsy, but I'd bet on it. Alice's gaze shifted back to the typewriter, its final line of ink seeming to pulse under her scrutiny. There, between random letters and messy ink stains, she saw something strange. The word "tonight" repeated 3 times in what seemed like a desperate attempt to communicate. It was unusual, unsettling, and Alice couldn't shake the feeling that it held the key to unraveling what had happened here. The next morning, Alice dived into Julian's life. Known for his dark thrillers and cryptic characters, he was a man with few friends and even fewer close connections. But there were a handful of names that stood out, 3 people he had been seen with in the weeks leading up to his death: a former lover, a rival writer, and his reclusive neighbor. First on her list was Marianne Foster, Julian's former partner, a passionate and outspoken journalist who had ended things with him only a few months ago. She was known for her sharp tongue and tendency to make enemies, traits that had landed her in the occasional scandal. When Alice questioned her, Marianne's answers were clipped and guarded. Yes, Julian and I parted ways. He was difficult, Marianne admitted, her voice laced with a bitterness she tried to hide. But I didn't kill him. Besides, he had plenty of other enemies. If you're looking for suspects, you're looking in the wrong place. Do you know anything about him working on a new manuscript? Alice asked, trying to detect a flicker of guilt or fear in Marianne's eyes. Marianne shook her head. He hadn't written anything in months, Detective. Said he was in a rut. It's why he'd been such a difficult person to be around. As Alice left, she couldn't help but wonder if the bitterness she'd sensed had something more sinister lurking beneath it. Next on her list was Max Carter, a rival writer whose career had suffered in Julian's shadow. Known for his flamboyant personality and over-the-top claims about his talent, Max had clashed with Julian numerous times in public. When Alice arrived at Max's apartment, he seemed almost unfazed by the news of Julian's death. I always knew something would get him eventually, Max sneered, lounging on his leather couch. He was paranoid, thought the world was out to get him. But if you're here to accuse me, you're wasting your time. Julian was a has-been, Detective. I had no reason to want him dead. Max's words seemed convincing, but his nonchalance struck Alice as oddly rehearsed, almost like he'd prepared himself for her arrival. As Alice left, she noticed a framed article on Max's wall, an interview where Julian had ruthlessly critiqued Max's work, calling it the ramblings of a fame chaser. Alice wondered if, beneath Max's arrogant exterior, a bruised ego might have festered into something more dangerous. Her final visit took her to an old brick building a few blocks from Julian's home, where his neighbor and close friend, Emily Norton, resided. Emily was a quiet woman with a soft demeanor, often described as gentle and kind. She had taken care of Julian's cat when he traveled, and by all accounts, they had shared a close, if somewhat peculiar, friendship. Emily greeted Alice with red-rimmed eyes, clearly shaken by the news. Julian was like family to me, she whispered, her hands wringing together. He had so much left to say. I don't understand who could do this. As Alice looked around, something caught her attention, a small collection of plants lining the window ledge. One, in particular, seemed out of place, a rare and toxic flower known as angel's trumpet, a plant often used in ancient times for its poison. Noticing Alice's gaze, Emily quickly offered an explanation. "I grow them for their beauty," she said nervously, her voice faltering. "Julian loved them. He even asked for a few cuttings a while back." Alice raised an eyebrow, but before she could question Emily further, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. The autopsy report had confirmed the presence of a rare and potent toxin in Julian's system, the very same toxin found in Angel's trumpet. Back at the station, Alice sifted through her notes, piecing together the puzzle. Each suspect had their own potential motive, but none felt quite right. Just as frustration began to set in, she remembered the last line Julian had typed on his typewriter. "Tonight. Tonight. Tonight." She had initially dismissed it as a rambling of a desperate man, but now a new thought crossed her mind. What if it was a clue? Digging through Julian's manuscripts, she discovered a chilling parallel. In his final unfinished novel, a character used the word "tonight" repeatedly as a hidden code, a call for help. The character had known they were in danger, and by repeating the word, they tried to leave a subtle warning. Suddenly everything clicked. Alice's mind raced back to the suspects, focusing on one in particular, Emily. She remembered the toxic plant on her windowsill and how Julian had trusted her implicitly. Emily had cared for Julian, been close to him, and perhaps even felt possessive of him. As his only trusted friend, Julian might have confided in her about his plans for a new manuscript, a story where a quiet friend and confidant hides a darker nature. With a heavy heart, Alice confronted Emily later that night. Her gentle facade quickly cracked under pressure. "Yes, I did it," Emily admitted, her voice icy and calm. "Julian was going to ruin everything with that new manuscript of his. He didn't know what he was saying, didn't care who it hurt." As she was led away, Emily's final words lingered in Alice's mind, a haunting reminder of how trust could so easily be shattered. Julian had tried to leave a clue in his final moments, and even though he hadn't lived to see justice, his last words had led to the truth.